My name is Robert. I am 59 years old and I am a retired structural engineer living in the Pacific Northwest. I stood in the center of my garage. The concrete floor was cold beneath my shoes. My daughter Sarah stood in the doorway. She would not meet my eyes. She looked at a stain on the floor. "It's only for 2 months," she said. Her voice was thin. "Greg's parents can't do the stairs. They need the master suite." I looked at my workbench. I looked at the uninsulated drywall. This was my home. I paid the mortgage, yet I was being asked to sleep next to the lawnmower. I did not yell. I did not throw my hands up. I simply nodded. "I understand," I said. Sarah looked relieved. She thought she had won. She thought I was a piece of furniture. She thought I could be moved wherever it was convenient. She was wrong. I walked past her into the kitchen. My son-in-law, Greg, was eating a sandwich. He didn't look up. "Is he cool with it?" Greg asked. "He understands," Sarah said. They continued eating. I went to my bedroom. It was the room I had shared with my late wife. The walls were a soft blue. The light was perfect in the afternoon. I sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the photos on the dresser. I realized something in that silence. I was no longer the head of this household. I was a resource. I was a utility like the electricity or the water. They used me because I was there. They respected me only as far as I was useful. If I stayed in the garage, I accepted that role. I would be the old man in the storage unit. I took a breath. I felt a strange sense of calm. I did not want to fight them. I did not want to evict my own daughter, but I would not live in a garage. I opened my laptop. I checked my bank accounts. I have been careful with money my whole life. I have a pension. I have savings. I looked at rentals. I filtered the search. I selected oceanfront. It was the off-season. Prices were reasonable. I found a small cottage 2 hours away. It was not a mansion. It was a 2-bedroom shingled house. It had a fireplace. It had a deck facing the water. I clicked book now for 3 months. The next morning I began to pack. I did not pack for the garage. I packed my clothes. I packed my favorite books. I packed the coffee maker I liked. Sarah came home from work early. She saw the boxes in the hallway. "Getting a head start?" she asked. She smiled. "The garage isn't ready yet, Dad. Greg needs to clear the bikes." "I know," I said. I taped a box shut. "I am not moving to the garage." Her smile faded. "What do you mean?" "I am moving out," I said. The room went quiet. The refrigerator hummed in the background. "Out," she whispered. "Where?" "To the coast," I said. "I rented a house." Greg walked in then. He saw the tension. "What's going on?" he asked. "Dad is leaving," Sarah said. Greg looked confused. "But my parents are coming on Monday." "The master suite is all theirs," I said. I picked up a box. "But who will watch the house?" Greg asked. He meant who will pay the bills. "You will," I said. I kept my voice even. "I will keep paying the mortgage. That is my gift to you." They looked at each other. "But the utilities?" Sarah asked. "The food, the internet." "You are both employed," I said. "You can handle the utilities." Panic flickered in Greg's eyes. They lived rent-free. They had grown accustomed to my income covering the gaps. "Dad, you can't just leave," Sarah said. "We need you here." "No," I corrected her. "You need my wallet here." It was a harsh thing to say, but it was the truth. I carried the box to my car. I did not slam the door. I loaded the trunk. I came back for the next load. They stood in the kitchen. They looked like children. They were 30 years old. It was time they felt the weight of the world. "When will you be back?" Sarah asked. She sounded scared. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe in the spring, maybe not." I finished packing. I looked at my house one last time. It was a beautiful house, but it was crowded with expectations. I got into my car. I drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. The drive took 2 hours. The road wound through the pine trees. Then the trees opened up. I saw the gray water of the Pacific. I arrived at the cottage. The key was in the lockbox. I opened the door. The air smelled of salt and cedar. It was cold, but a clean cold. I turned on the heat. I unpacked my coffee maker. I made a cup of coffee. I sat on the deck, wrapped in a coat. The ocean roared in front of me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sarah. "The heater in the house is making a noise. What do we do?" I looked at the message. I looked at the waves. I typed a reply, "Call a repairman." I put the phone on silent. I took a sip of coffee. For the first time in 2 years, I was alone. I was not in a garage. I was free. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the garage where I held my breath to avoid waking the house. This was a clean, open silence, broken only by the wind rattling the loose screen door. I made coffee. The machine was a cheap plastic model that came with the rental, but the coffee was hot, and I drank it sitting on the small, weathered deck. It wasn't a mansion. It was a modest two-bedroom cottage 3 streets back from the water, rented at an off-season rate my pension could just barely cover if I was careful. But I could smell the salt air and I couldn't smell the gasoline and damp concrete of the garage. My phone buzzed on the table. Sarah, I let it ring. It buzzed again 2 minutes later, then a text. Dad, where are you? Mark's parents are pulling into the driveway in an hour. We need you to move the boxes so they can park. I took a sip of coffee. The urge to rush to apologize to fix it for her rose up in my chest like heartburn. It was a reflex honed over 25 years of parenting. I watched a seagull pick at a clam shell on the neighbor's roof. I forced my breathing to slow down. I wasn't being vindictive. I was simply opting out. I spent the morning unpacking. I didn't have much. 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of books, and my shaving kit. Placing my toothbrush in the bathroom holder felt ceremonial. It was the only toothbrush there. No clutter, no negotiation for counter space, no damp towels on the floor that weren't mine. By 2:00 p.m. the phone had stopped buzzing. The panic on the other end had likely shifted to anger and then to the dawning realization of logistics. I waited until the sun began to dip low, casting long orange shadows across the deck before I dialed her back. She answered on the first ring. Dad, are you okay? We looked everywhere. The garage is empty. Her voice was high, tight. I'm fine, Sarah, I said. My voice sounded deeper than usual, steadier. I'm safe. Where are you? Mark's dad had to park on the street. They're asking where you are so we can do dinner. Well, I'm not coming to dinner. What do you mean you have to eat? Just come back. We can figure out the sleeping arrangements later. Maybe the couch for a few nights until we clear out the storage unit for you. No, I said gently. I'm not sleeping on the couch and I'm not sleeping in the garage. Dad, stop being dramatic. We discussed this. It's just for a few months while Mark's parents get settled. They need the guest room, your room, because of his mom's hip. It's family. I know, I said, and I made room for them. I moved out. There was a silence on the line, genuine confusion. Moved out to where? I rented a place near the coast. I signed a 6-month lease. You what? The volume dropped. But you can't afford that, and who's going to help with the kids after school? Who's going to let the dog out? The questions hung there, exposing the architecture of our relationship. It wasn't about my company, it was about my utility. You and Mark will figure it out, I said. You're capable adults. This is selfish, she snapped, the fear turning to accusation. You're abandoning us because you didn't want to be slightly uncomfortable for a few weeks. It wasn't a few weeks, Sarah, and it wasn't about comfort, it was about dignity. I looked out toward the sliver of ocean visible between the houses. I love you, but I can't live in a garage at 59, I won't. Mark is going to be furious, she said, her voice wavering. That's between you and Mark, I replied. I'll come visit in a few weeks once you're settled, but I'm staying here tonight. What? I hung up before she could argue further. There was no triumph in it, only a quiet, heavy relief. I turned off the phone and sat back in the plastic chair. The air was cooling down, but for the first time in months I didn't feel cold. I watched the sun disappear alone and entirely at peace. I sat there until the twilight turned to full dark. My phone buzzed twice in my lap, vibrations against the plastic armrest, but I didn't turn it over. I knew who it was. I knew what they wanted. For the first time in years, what they wanted didn't dictate what I did next. I went inside. The rental was modest, a 1-bedroom ground floor unit with peeling blue paint and a sliding door that stuck in the track, but it had a bed with clean sheets and a kitchen that didn't smell like gasoline and damp concrete. I made a sandwich standing at the counter, eating slowly. There was no rush. No one was waiting for me to fix a leak or watch the kids while they went out to dinner. That night I slept for 9 hours. The morning light hitting my face was what woke me. I lay there for a moment, confused by the brightness, instinctively tense, waiting for the sound of the garage door opening or Mark's heavy footsteps on the floorboards above. But there was only the rhythmic shushing of the tide. I got up and brewed coffee. While the pot gurgled, I finally checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Sarah, 1 long text. Dad, Mark is really stressed. He says you're being unreasonable. We counted on your rent money for the nursery. Please come home. We can talk about the garage heater. I stared at the screen. The guilt was still there, a familiar, dull ache in my chest. It would be so easy to go back to apologize, to hand over my pension check and smooth things over for her sake. That's what I had done my whole life. But then I looked around the small, sunlit living room. I looked at the key on the table, my key. I typed a reply, I love you, Sarah, but I can't live like that anymore. I'm not coming back. You and Mark need to figure out your finances without me. I hit send before I could second guess the tone. Then I blocked Mark's number. It wasn't out of malice, but necessity. I couldn't handle his negotiating, his bullying, or his logic that always somehow twisted into me being the selfish one. I took my coffee out to the small patio. A neighbor, an older woman walking a golden retriever, waved as she passed. I waved back. It was such a small, normal gesture, yet it felt significant. I wasn't the invisible old man in the garage anymore. I was just a neighbor. Days turned into a week. The anxiety of the first few hours began to recede, replaced by a quiet routine. I walked the beach. I read paperbacks I bought for $1 at the local library. I cooked simple meals. Sarah called a few days later. Her voice was tired, but the panic was gone. Mark's looking for a second job, she said, almost whispering. He's not happy about it. He's a capable man, I said gently. He'll figure it out. Oh, I miss you, Dad. I miss you too, sweetheart. The guest couch here isn't great, but it's open whenever you want to visit, just you. She didn't argue. We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing important, the weather, the kids' school projects. When we hung up, I didn't feel drained. I felt like a father again, not a resource. I finished my coffee and looked out at the water. The horizon was a straight, steady line. I had less money now, and I was aging in a place that wasn't the home I had built 40 years ago. But I stretched my legs out, feeling the warmth of the sun on my knees, and realized I had something far more valuable than a bedroom in a house that didn't want me. I had my life back. And this time I was going to keep it. 2 weeks later, I drove back to the suburbs to collect the last of my winter clothes in my toolbox. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and overcast, the kind of light that makes familiar streets look tired. When I pulled into the driveway of the house I had paid off 5 years ago, there was barely room to park. A muddy SUV with an out-of-state plate took up the center spot. I let myself in through the side gate. The grass was getting long, tufts of weeds poking through the pavers I had laid down the summer Sarah was born. It bothered me for a second, an instinctive twitch to go find the mower, but I forced my hands into my pockets. It wasn't my lawn to worry about anymore. Inside, the house smelled different, not bad, just crowded. The scent of heavy cooking spices and stale coffee hung in the hallway. I could hear the television blaring from the living room, a game show host shouting over the sound of a toddler crying. I found Sarah in the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, scrubbing a pot with a ferocity that suggested she was angry at the metal itself. When she saw me, her shoulders dropped, but she didn't smile. "Hey, Dad," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "I didn't know you were coming by today." "Just grabbing the last box from the attic," I said. "I won't be long." She leaned against the counter, glancing toward the living room where her mother-in-law was shouting something at the TV. Sarah looked older than she was. The stress lines around her eyes were new. "The water heater is making that knocking sound again," she said, her voice low. "Mike tried to look at it, but he doesn't know what he's doing. I was hoping maybe you could." She trailed off. It was the old dynamic, the one where I was the fix-it man, the safety net, the silent partner in her marriage. I looked at her, really looked at her. I loved her, but I realized I had been enabling this chaos by constantly smoothing it over. If I went down to the basement now with my wrench, I'd be tightening a bolt on a life I was supposed to have left behind. "It's probably the sediment buildup," I said calmly. "There's a number for a plumber on the fridge magnet. The guy is honest, he'll sort it out." Sarah blinked, surprised. "You're not going to check it?" "What?" "I have to get back before traffic hits," I lied gently. "The drive to the coast takes a while." I walked past her up the stairs and retrieved my box. On my way out, I passed the door to the garage, the place they had suggested I live so her in-laws could have my master suite. The door was cracked open. I peeked inside. It was cold, dark, and piled high with the in-laws' overflow boxes. A draft swept across the concrete floor. I closed the door firmly. When I walked back through the kitchen, Sarah was on the phone, arguing with her husband about money. She didn't look up as I passed. I didn't feel angry, and I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a quiet, heavy certainty that I was doing the right thing. I got into my car and backed out of the driveway. As I turned the corner, the house disappeared from the rearview mirror. The tightness in my chest, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years, finally unspooled. The drive back was long, but as I got closer to the rental, the air changed. The suburban gray gave way to the sharp, salty clarity of the coast. I parked the car and carried my toolbox inside. That evening, I sat on the small wooden deck with a glass of water. The ocean was loud, a rhythmic, crashing roar that drowned out any memory of game shows or knocking pipes. I was alone, but for the first time in a decade, I wasn't lonely. I watched the sun dip below the water, swallowed by the vastness of it all, and finally I exhaled. 2 weeks settled into a quiet rhythm. Coffee at 6, a walk along the shoreline at 7, and work remote consulting from a laptop on the kitchen island until 3. It was a smaller life than the one I'd maintained in the suburbs, stripped of the lawn care and the maintenance requests, but it fit me better. I knew the silence wouldn't last. It broke on a Tuesday afternoon. My phone buzzed against the counter. Sarah. I let it ring twice before picking up, steeling myself against the reflexive urge to apologize for not being there. Dad. Her voice was tight, the background noise a chaotic mix of a television blaring and a dog barking. Where are you? Mark's parents just pulled up with a U-Haul and the garage still has your workbench in it. You said you'd clear it out. I took a sip of my coffee, looking out at the dunes. I cleared out my personal effects, Sarah. The workbench is bolted to the floor, it stays with the house. But where are you sleeping? She asked, the stress pitching her voice higher. Mark thought you were just staying at a motel until the dust settled. We need you here to help move their boxes. His dad has a bad back. I'm not at a motel, I said gently. I'm at my new lease about an hour south. There was a pause, long and heavy. The background noise seemed to fade as she processed the distance. A lease, Dad, don't be dramatic. You're not moving an hour away. Who's going to pick up the boys on Tuesdays? Who's going to fix the sink? It's still dripping. I left the number for a plumber on the fridge, I said, and I'm sure Mark can handle the boxes. He's young. What? This isn't funny, she snapped, though the anger sounded fragile, bordering on panic. You can't just abandon us because we asked for a little space. It's temporary, just until they find a condo. We agreed you'd take the garage. You agreed, I corrected, keeping my voice level. I didn't. So that's it, you're just going to leave me with a full house and no help. I'm leaving you with your husband and your family, Sarah. I'm your father, not your contractor. She went quiet again. I could hear Mark in the background asking who she was talking to. I waited, giving her space to find the next words. I expected anger, perhaps a guilt trip about my grandsons. It's really hard right now, Dad, she whispered finally. They have so much stuff, the house feels tiny. What? I know, I said. Growing pains are hard, but you'll figure it out, you're capable. I didn't offer to drive up. I didn't offer to pay for a storage unit. I simply held the line, listening to the life I used to subsidize unfold without me. Can we come visit? She asked, the fight draining out of her. Maybe next weekend, the boys miss you. I looked around my small, sun-drenched living room. It was peaceful, it was mine. Next weekend is too soon, I said. Give it a month, let everyone settle in, we can talk then. I hung up before she could negotiate. It wasn't a punishment, it was a necessary distance. I washed my cup in the sink, dried it, and placed it in the cupboard. The sun was still high and the tide was coming. I had nowhere to be, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. The weeks that followed were quiet. I didn't ignore her texts, but I kept my responses brief and polite. I stopped offering solutions to the small crises she broadcasted, the leaky faucet, the arguments over thermostat settings, the baby's teething. It was a muscle I had to train, suppressing the instinct to drive back and fix things. Instead, I channeled that energy into the cottage. I spent my mornings stripping the weathered gray wood of the back deck, the repetitive motion of the sander clearing my head in a way conversation never could. When the month was up, Sarah drove down. She arrived alone. I watched from the porch as her car crunched over the gravel driveway. She looked tired, her posture slumped as she walked up the steps. She didn't look like a woman enjoying the help of live-in grandparents. She looked like someone whose home was no longer her own. It's quaint, she said, looking around the small, open space of my living room. She didn't take off her coat. It's manageable, I said. Coffee. We sat in the Adirondack chairs on the deck, facing the water. The wind was brisk, but the sun had warmth in it. She held her mug with both hands, staring at the horizon. Mark's mom reorganized the kitchen, she said after a long silence. I can't find the spatula or the good heavy pot you gave me. It takes time to merge households, I said evenly. She turned to me, her brow furrowed. They dug up Mom's hydrangeas, Dad. They said they needed more light for a vegetable patch. I felt a sharp, hollow ache in my chest. My late wife had planted those 20 years ago. I took a slow breath, tasting the salt air. It's their garden now, Sarah. They can grow what they want. But it's your house. It's the house I own, I corrected. It's the house they live in. I live here. She set her coffee down on the railing with a clatter. It's suffocating. Mark is trying, but his dad just sits in your recliner and watches news at full volume all day. In the garage. I went in there to look for some boxes. It's freezing, Dad, damp. I don't know how I ever thought you could stay out there. I couldn't, I said. That's why I didn't. She leaned forward, her voice taking on that familiar, pleading pitch. We could insulate it. Mark says he can do the drywall if you help him on weekends. If you came back just for a while, you know how to handle them. You could be the buffer. They respect you. There it was. She didn't miss me. She missed the peacekeeper. She missed the friction absorber. She wanted me to return to the periphery of my own life so hers could run smoother. I looked at my daughter. I loved her, but I saw her clearly now. She was an adult who had made a choice, and she was trying to outsource the consequences of that choice to me. No, Sarah. Just for the winter, until we get a routine. No, I didn't offer excuses. I didn't blame the drive or the renovation work. I just let the refusal sit there between us, solid and heavy. She stared at me, waiting for the negotiation, the compromise I had always offered in the past. When it didn't come, she slumped back in her chair. The fight went out of her. You really like it here, she said, sounding almost accusing, as if my contentment was a betrayal. I do. It's quiet. It's mine. We ate lunch in a comfortable, if slightly distant, silence. I asked about the baby. She complained about her mother-in-law's cooking, but the dynamic had shifted. I wasn't the resource anymore. I was just her father, living a separate life. When she left, the afternoon shadows were stretching long across the gravel. She hugged me, holding on a little tighter than usual. I'll tell them to leave the rose bushes alone, she said as she opened her car door. Tell them whatever you want, I said, leaning against the porch railing. It's just a house, Sarah. I watched her drive away until her car was just a speck on the coast road. I didn't feel the urge to call her or to worry about the hydrangeas. I turned back to the deck. I had a few more boards to sand before the sun went down. The tide was going out, leaving the sand smooth and clean, and for the first time in years I felt exactly the same. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm I hadn't known I was missing. Wake up, coffee, work on the cottage, walk the beach, sleep. It was a simple existence, stripped of the friction that had defined my life in the city. I wasn't fixing leaking faucets for ungrateful tenants or mediating arguments about whose turn it was to empty the dishwasher. I was just existing. I was staining the new railing on a Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed on the sawhorse. It was Sarah. I wiped my hands on a rag and let it ring 3 times before answering. Dad. She sounded breathless, the background noise suggesting she was hiding in a bathroom or a closet. Thank God, the boiler, it's making that banging sound again, the one it made 2 winters ago. It's the sediment buildup, I said, looking out at the gray Atlantic water. It needs to be flushed. I don't know how to do that. Greg doesn't either, and his parents. Dad, his mom keeps turning the thermostat up to 80, and now the system is overworking. Can you drive up just to take a look? It would save us a service call fee. There it was, the reflex. The assumption that my time was a free resource, always available to plug the leaks in their lives. I can't, Sarah, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm in the middle of staining the deck. If I stop now, it'll dry uneven. But it's an emergency. If it breaks, we have no hot water. Then you call a plumber, I said. I can text you the number of the guy I used for the rental properties. A plumber costs $200 just to show up, she snapped, the stress cracking her voice. Why are you being like this? You used to fix everything. I did, I agreed, and now I'm fixing this house. Silence stretched over the line. I could hear the faint murmur of a television in the background on her end, probably the in-laws watching the afternoon news in the living room I had paid for. It's really hard here, Dad, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Greg's mom, she rearranged the kitchen cabinets. She put your old spice rack in a box in the garage. She said it was dated. A month ago, that would have felt like a physical blow. It would have been an erasure of my history in that home. Standing here with the smell of salt air and wood stain, it just felt like information, data from a life that no longer belonged to me. It's her kitchen now, Sarah, I said gently. You invited them in. That means they get to decide where the spices go. I didn't think it would be like this. I thought, I don't know. I thought having them here would make things easier, financially. But the grocery bill is double and I feel like a guest in my own house. I felt a twinge of parental instinct, the urge to rush in, write a check, or offer a solution. But I looked down at my hands, stained with the work I had chosen for myself. If I went back now, I would just be the buffer again. I would be the cushion that stopped them from feeling the consequences of their choices. You're an adult, Sarah, I said. You and Greg have to set boundaries with them, or you don't, but I can't do it for you. So you're just not coming? Not today, I said. Send me a picture of the boiler gauge if you want, and I'll tell you if it's dangerous, but call the plumber. I hung up before she could argue. I didn't slam the phone down, I placed it carefully on the railing. I waited for the guilt to hit me, the heavy, suffocating weight I usually carried after saying no to her. It didn't come. Instead, I picked up the brush and dipped it back into the can. The tide was coming in, reclaiming the shoreline inch by inch. I focused on the wood grain, watching the stains soak in, turning the pale pine into something weathered and durable. I had a lot of work left to do. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the water a bruised purple, but I kept working until the last of the daylight faded. My shoulders ached, a good, clean ache that came from effort rather than tension. When I finally wiped my hands on a rag and went inside, the silence of the house didn't feel empty. It felt spacious. I made a simple dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it standing at the kitchen island. For years, dinner had been a production of navigating moods, walking on eggshells around my son-in-law's complaints about his job or my daughter's silent stress. Here, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed on the counter. I let it sit there while I washed my plate. When I finally dried my hands and picked it up, there were 3 text messages from her. Dad, are you serious? Mark's parents are asking where you went. It's embarrassing. We need to talk about the electric bill. It's higher than usual. I stared at the screen. The old me would have immediately calculated the cost, worried about their embarrassment, and offered to transfer money to keep the peace. I would have apologized for being absent, but looking at the messages now, I saw the pattern I had enabled for decades. They weren't worried about me, they were worried about the gap I'd left in their convenience. I typed a reply, keeping it slow and deliberate. I'm safe. The house is yours to manage now, including the bills. I'll send you the contact info for the utility company so you can put it in Mark's name. I hit send before I could second-guess the tone. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. It was Mark. I let it go to voicemail. Then came another text from my daughter. You can't just abandon us like this. The garage is still there if you want to come back. We can make it nicer. The offer was absurd, almost comical, yet I knew she believed she was being generous. She truly thought offering me a renovated storage space in a house I had paid for was a kindness. That was the saddest part, not that they were malicious, but that they were so fundamentally unaware of my humanity. To them, I was a function, not a father. I didn't reply to that one. I switched the phone to Do Not Disturb and placed it in the drawer by the entry. I stepped out onto the back deck with a cup of tea. The air was salty and cold, biting through my flannel shirt, but I didn't retreat inside. I listened to the rhythmic crash of the waves, a sound that demanded nothing from me. For the first time in 20 years, I didn't know what I was going to do tomorrow. I didn't have a schedule to keep, a grandchild to pick up, or a dispute to mediate. The uncertainty should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath I'd taken since my wife passed. I sipped the tea. It was going to be a cold night, but the heating system here worked just fine, and for the first time I was the only one controlling the thermostat. I went back inside, locking the sliding door behind me. The silence in the living room was heavy, but it was a clean sort of heaviness. I rinsed the mug in the sink, watching the water swirl down the drain. It was a mundane task, but doing it in a kitchen that didn't smell of diaper pails or burnt toast felt like a luxury. I placed the cup on the drying rack and wiped my hands on a towel that was actually dry. My phone buzzed on the counter. I knew who it was before I looked. It had been 3 hours since I drove away. The in-laws' flight would have landed by now. They would be at the house, luggage cluttering the hallway, expecting the guest room to be prepped and vacated, expecting me to be moving boxes into the garage. I stared at the screen. Emily, 3 missed calls. Then a text message appeared. Dad, where are you? Greg's parents are here. The bed isn't stripped. I felt the old reflex kick in, the tightening in my chest, the urge to apologize, to rush in and smooth things over. For 10 years since her mother died, I had been the buffer. I had been the problem solver. If the water heater broke, I fixed it. If the baby cried, I walked the floor. If they needed space, I made myself smaller. Today, she had asked me to make myself small enough to fit between a lawnmower and a stack of winter tires. I sat down on one of the bar stools. My hands were steady, though my heart wasn't. I didn't want to hurt her. I just wanted to exist as something other than a convenience. I typed a response, my thumb hovering over the letters. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want to explain the years of incremental boundary crossing that had led to this moment. I'm taking some time away, I wrote. I rented the place at the Cape for a month. You and Greg can have the master suite. The house is yours. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The response was immediate. The 3 dots bubbled on the screen for a long time, disappearing and reappearing. She was confused. The script had changed and she didn't know her lines. What? Why? We need you here. Who's going to watch the kids on Tuesday? There it was. Not are you okay? Not we miss you. Just the logistics of my utility. I put the phone on silent and placed it face down on the granite. I didn't reply to the question about Tuesday. Tuesday was a problem for Greg and Emily. Tuesday was a problem for parents, not for a grandfather who had just been asked to live in a storage space. I walked into the bedroom, the one with the ocean view, the one with a bed that was mine and mine alone. I unpacked my suitcase slowly. I hung my shirts in the closet, leaving plenty of space between the hangers. Later that night, I heated up a can of soup. It wasn't a gourmet meal, but I ate it at the table, listening to the wind rattle the window panes. The guilt was still there, nagging at the back of my mind like a low-grade fever. It told me I was being selfish. It told me I was abandoning them. But then I remembered the garage. I remembered the way Greg had looked at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes when Emily suggested it, and the way Emily had said, "It's just temporary, Dad," with a tone that suggested temporary could last until I died. I finished the soup. I washed the bowl. I didn't check the phone again. I went to bed early, stretching my legs out into the cool sheets, and for the first time in years, I fell asleep without reviewing a to-do list that wasn't mine. The next morning, the sun woke me up. No alarm, no crying toddler, just light hitting my eyelids. I made coffee and finally turned the phone over. 12 texts, 4 voicemails. I listened to the last one. It was Emily. Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It sounded thin, strained. "Dad, look, I'm sorry about the garage thing. Okay, we were just stressed. Greg's parents are there a lot. Please just come back. We can figure something else out. Maybe you can take the couch." I closed my eyes. The couch, she still didn't get it. It wasn't about the furniture. It was about the assumption that my comfort was the only currency available to pay for her peace of mind. I texted back, "I'm paid up here through the month. We can talk about visiting in a few weeks. Good luck with the in-laws." I turned the phone off completely this time. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, down the wooden steps toward the sand. The ocean didn't care about my guilt. It just kept moving, pulling back and rushing forward, ancient and indifferent. I decided to walk until my legs were tired, and then I would simply sit down, because I could.